right, hi, welcome to math class. All right, today what we're talking about are rockin' ratios. We've talked a little bit about ratios. We're just going to redo this. You can watch it anytime you need to. Let me set up my pen and make sure that I got everything working right. All right, so here's the deal. I'm having a slumber party. I know how to make 10 pancakes because I have a recipe for about takes, but I need to be able to make pancakes for my whole slumber party. I need to be able to make at least 20 pancakes. So how am I going to do that? Well, that's where ratios come into play, and we're going to learn all about ratios today. So you'll be able to understand the concept of a ratio and how to write, identify, and compare ratios when we're all done. All right, before we do that, we need to do a little bit of review. We need to remember how to simplify fractions. So remember, simplifying fractions is when you divide both the top and the bottom of the fraction until you can't go any further. So let's just say, for example, I have the fraction 6/8. I want to simplify 6/8. Well, I'm going to divide both the top and the bottom until I can't go any further. And when we do that, we find the greatest common factor that goes both into 6 and 8. We know that that is 2. So we use the greatest common factor of 2 to simplify this fraction down to 3/4. Looking at 3/4, I can't go any further, so I know 3/4 is simplified. 6/8 is simplified down to 3/4. The other thing I need you to remember is equivalent fractions. So equivalent fractions have the same value even though they may look a little different. So if you look at 6/8 and 3/4, they look a little different, but they have the same value because it's just one fraction simplified. So remember also when you're making equivalent fractions, if we were to have taken the let's get my pen in the right place, 3/4 and made an equivalent fraction, we're going to multiply both the top and the bottom by the same number, and that gives us 6/8. So we just made an equivalent fraction. So 3/4 times the 2/2 gives us 6/8, and we can say that 3/4 and 6/8 are equivalent fractions. So the rule to remember is you change the bottom using multiply or divide, and the same to the top must be applied. So that's equivalent fractions and simplifying fractions. All right. So let's talk about what a ratio is. A ratio compares two or more quantities, or two or more numbers. So in this case, we see 2 eggs and 3 cups of flour. The ratio is the comparison, 2 eggs to 3 cups of flour. So we're comparing egg to flour. There are 3 ways that you can write a ratio. So you can write it using the word 2. So in our ratio of eggs to flour, we would have 2, 2, 3. Using a colon. 2, 3, or you can write it like a fraction using a fraction bar, 2/3. So all 3 of those things say the same thing. They say 2 eggs for every 3 cups of flour. All right, when you're writing a ratio as a fraction, order is important. We talked about that in class. The quantity mentioned first is the numerator. The quantity mentioned second is the denominator. So for example, the ratio of 5 to 12 is written as 5/12. In our ratio of eggs to flour, where eggs were mentioned first, 2 eggs over 3. So 3 cups of flour. 3 is the denominator, it was mentioned second. So that's a rule to remember, that order is important. So when you're using ratios, see, a fruit punch recipe calls for 4 cups of strawberries and 6 cups of grapes. So write the ratio of cups of strawberries to cups of grapes. The one mentioned first is the numerator, and second is always your denominator. But there's 3 ways to write this. Remember, we talked about 3 ways to write, where's my cursor? There we go. 3 ways to write this ratio. We have 4 to 6. We have 4:6, or we have 4/section bar. One of the things to keep in mind when you're using ratios is it's common to write ratios in their simplest form. To create the simplest form of 4/6, to simplify that fraction, we would simply divide both the top and the bottom by the greatest common factor, which would give us 2/3. So that is the ratio in simplest form, would look like this. So when we do simplest form, we're actually creating groups. So we had 4 strawberries to 6 cups of grapes. We're going to simplify that down like I did just a moment ago by dividing it by 2 because we can put them in 2 different groups. That's the greatest common factor that goes into both of them, which gives us 2 over 3. So we can see that this is simple, the simplest form. Sorry. Okay, equivalent ratios. Ratios can also be scaled up. So in this case here where we're looking at 4/6 and 2/3, we know that 4/6 is equivalent to 2/3. So ratios that can also be scaled up. They can be equivalent ratios. 2 ratios are equivalent when they have the same value. So remember I was going to make pancakes and it took 2 eggs to 3 cups for every 3 cups of flour. That would make my pancakes. But now I needed to make even more pancakes. So I'm going to scale that ratio up. I'm going to create an equivalent ratio and make it bigger. So now I have 4 eggs and 6 cups of flour. So even though we now have 4 eggs and 6 cups of flour, the ratio is still the same as we saw with the strawberries and grapes. So 2 ratios are equivalent ratios when they have the same value. Alright, so for your notes today, a ratio is a comparison of 2 or more numbers. There are 3 ways to write a ratio. 3 listed here.
2 using the word 3, 3, or 2 using the fraction 3. Write ratios in the simplest form, and then 2 ratios are said to be equivalent ratios when they have the same value. So 2 to 3 and 4 to 6 are the same, and you see I've written it out the 3 different ways. 2:3 is the same as 4 to 6, and 2 over 3 using a fraction is equivalent to 4/6. Okay, that's all for today, so take care and we'll see you in math class.